we want to welcome everybody to an afternoon with the author. I'm Deidre Teagarden, and on behalf of everybody at the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center, we want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. Now, I know everybody has read the bios of these incredibly wonderful individuals.
Are other people coming? She's talking about somebody.
Yeah. David Louie is a civil trial lawyer at Kobayashi Sugita and Goda in Honolulu, Hawaii. From 2011 to 2014, he served as the Attorney General of Hawaii. He provided advice, counsel, and representation to the governor, cabinet, legislature, and all state agencies and employees. He was involved with numerous legal issues of importance, from marriage equity to Native Hawaiian issues, to negotiating a $40 million conservation easement on 665 acres of pristine oceanfront land, and worked closely with other attorneys general on the national mortgage foreclosure state settlement, internet safety, human trafficking, and consumer protection. But what this bio doesn't share is how gracious and approachable he was as the Attorney General, regardless of whatever was happening in the background, and the lovely, calm demeanor he had, no matter what the situation was. So we're very excited to have our afternoon with the author, Mr. David Louie.
Thank you so much.
And he is going to be interviewed by an equally exquisite individual, Governor Neil Abercrombie, with a public career spanning 5 decades, culminating in the 7th governor of the state of Hawaii. His term as governor was spent grappling with the effects of the recession, including restructuring state contracts and pension obligations. He is an author himself, holds an MA in sociology and his PhD in American Studies from the University of Hawaii. But what his bio doesn't share is the utter compassion, the full engagement and care with which he governed, how he would always give his staff absolutely amazing opportunities. It doesn't talk about how in the 1960s and 70s he could be found at the Toyo Theater in Honolulu watching the old samurai movies, and how those movies really helped shape how he governed in later years. And it also neglects to talk about his work with Honolulu, with the Hawaii Public Radio in the early days, and how he is a amazing jazz fan. And being on your staff was truly a once in a lifetime opportunity, very ichigo ichie, and as you said in your preference, best job ever. So please help me welcome David Louie, Governor Neil Abercrombie, for a very special afternoon with the author.
Thank you, Governor. Aloha, many, many thanks for having us here today. As you can see from the introduction that Deidre gave, I can say to you, as the 7th governor of the state of Hawaii, that there has never ever been, and I doubt ever will be, anybody to match the capacity of Deidre Teagarden as the protocol officer of the state of Hawaii. Just absolutely tremendous. In fact, I think many of you would have enjoyed the conferences we would have when we get delegations coming in from China. David, you were at some of these meetings. Get delegations coming in from China, delegations coming in from Japan, legislative bodies and business groups and so on, and they're discussing things among themselves, and we're having conversation back and forth, and all of a sudden they realize that this Howley lady is standing there translating simultaneously for me as to what is actually being said by these people, right? And all of a sudden they straightened up real quick. But Deidre was absolutely fabulous in that job. No one was more gracious. You can see by way of the introduction, no one more articulate, no one better prepared. And hopefully David and I can follow up on the very gracious introduction that she's given to us. I'm particularly pleased to have the opportunity to what I guess in terms of the announcement of what we're doing today, be a moderator or an interviewer catalyst, if you will, for the opportunity to plumb the depths of perception that David Louie had as Attorney General. Let me just say, by way of a brief introduction to how that came about. And then David, perhaps we can start your journey as Attorney General from how we got together in the first place. I am a very strong advocate, and I'm glad that Joe Wildman and Tony Takatani and some other folks here who have an understanding of the judiciary and the approach that we take in Hawaii. I think that we are blessed never to have fallen prey to the idea of electing an attorney general. Most other states, I think there's only 3 or 4 states, five states now that have the governor appoint the attorney general, which I very, very deeply and fervently believe in. That the executive should be appointing whoever has the executive authority for the state he or she needs to have as attorney general someone that they can trust, not to think or be a puppet or a clone of the governor. Quite the opposite. Any governor that has any sense of responsibility and an understanding of what really needs to be done needs to have the best possible legal advice and perspective from someone. And that means that to have an election, that means you get stuck with whoever comes in under God knows what kind of political circumstance. In that context, then, I had the great good fortune to have a committee, a transition committee, which understood what I wanted to have done. So I didn't go looking for an attorney general. I stayed completely away from that. I think Tony might have could even explicate a little bit on this at some point during our conversation. But I relied on other people saying, let's go see and invite people to apply for attorney general, and let's see what emerges. In those days, I had the opportunity to do that choosing without it becoming public. And I am a very strong advocate. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this with David is this is the last attorney general that we're really going to have on a strictly objective basis, because the judicial selection committee, right?
But they don't affect the appointment by the.
They don't affect that. But this whole thing about choosing judges now, and the whole idea of whether or not we're going to make a public display of who might be chosen to either be judges or who might be chosen to be attorney general in the name of so-called transparency means that the whole internet world and every troll in sight gets to try to trash everybody who might become attorney general. This is the introduction I want to say is I was privileged and forever grateful that I had the opportunity to be able to discuss completely confidentially who it is that might serve as attorney general of the state of Hawaii, and then be able to make that choice and have the full confidence that we had the broadest possible foundation for that choice. And out of that emerged David Louie. When I had a chance to interview some of the people that had applied and were thinking about it and so on, I want you to know that I never compared one person to another for any appointment, but particularly where attorney general was concerned. I wasn't comparing one lawyer with another or one person with another. I operated on the basis that I wanted to know who the person said they were, what they were about, what values they held, and then make a judgment about how close I think they came to actually being the kind of person that they said they were and the values that they said they held. And it was clear to me almost immediately that if there was anybody that I thought was living the values that he or she was articulating, it was David Louie. It was my pleasure and my honor, and it continues to be a source of great satisfaction to me that I was able to pick David Louie as Attorney General. this seventh governorship of the state of Hawaii.
Well, thank you, Governor. Those are very kind words, and it was my pleasure, honor, and privilege to serve as the Attorney General of the state of Hawaii and to serve under Governor Abercrombie. And I do want to thank NVMC, Deidre, Melanie, for inviting me here and inviting the governor here, and for all the people on Zoom who have tuned in. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And as Deidre noted, I did right. Best job ever. Best job ever. And I'm forever grateful to this man here for entrusting me with his faith and confidence to give me the keys to the car so that I could drive the Attorney General's office. You know, it's not a light.
Right over the cliff.
And so there was a big responsibility. You know, you got to be careful for the pies in the face. We avoided any big pies in the face, and I was very happy with that. But it was a tremendous pleasure and privilege. And most people, I will tell you, I hesitated to take the job. I hesitated because I was in private practice. I was running my own law firm. I had clients. I was fat, dumb, and happy. But the opportunity to affect public policy, the opportunity to have a voice at the table, and the opportunity to maybe add my participation or weight as we tried to move the state forward in all of its issues was an unbelievable opportunity, and I really, really am grateful for
So
that.
how did you get to be, want to be an attorney in the first place? What was the trajectory from when you were a child that led you to the opportunity then to be interviewed to be Attorney General?
You know, that's funny. I used to like to talk back to my teachers and to argue with people.
I knew we had something in common.
And so some of them said, you know, you should be an attorney. But I came out of college and wasn't sure what I would do. Took a year off as a construction worker, building freeways, houses, and things like that. Hard physical labor that union people do. And I realized I wasn't going to do this for a lifetime. It was beyond me to do that. And I said, I'm going to invest in my education, invest in myself, and try and find a clean white collar office job. And so that's why I went to law school. And when I was in law school, you know, I met up with a number of Asian American attorneys and people who were doing progressive work, people who were working in the space. Dale Manami, one of my mentors, who brought the Korematsu case. For the Nisei veterans that are well aware of, you know, the infamous Order 9066, which, you know, incarcerated all the Japanese, both in Hawaii and on the mainland. And Dale led the push on that. A number of my friends served on that legal team. And so I stayed in touch with them, and I always felt that it was important to do that. But I did, I was in private practice. I was running a law firm. I was trying to make a buck. And then this opportunity came along, and I thought, well, you know, it's time to give back.
And that's one of the reasons that I was attracted to David's story, because I had worked with Dale Manami and the others on the Korematsu case as a member of Congress at that time. And of course, I was very much involved in the reparations situation, and later on Honouliuli, which was, you know, a detention camp on Oahu that not many people knew about, where AJs were concerned. And David had been a part of that. It was one of his motivations. And I thought, okay, I know what this guy's values are.
So it was good. So we were able to do I mean, now, you know, admittedly in Hawaii, we don't have the same discrimination issues for Japanese and Asian Americans that they do on the mainland. We're lucky in that regard. And I consider myself very fortunate to be here. And Hawaii is the most diverse state in the union, the most progressive state in the union, and really just such a wonderful place to be and to live. And so, but we had our other share of lots of issues to deal with in order to try and move things forward, try and move the ball forward. Barry? challenging times.
Perhaps we can pick one of those issues. Deidre mentioned, and you find it in the book almost right away, is when we came into office, and I say we, because I had the cabinet meet with me all the time and brought the Attorney General in and president of the university, the Department of Education and so on. I brought everybody in, and the lieutenant governor, never throws the lieutenant governor out, like some people. And because I thought we're all in this together. You may recall at that time, this is 2010, we're dealing with the after effects of the recession, with what I call a modern day depression from 2008. And the first thing that Calvert Young, maybe you've seen Calvert's name in the paper recently. He's the financial officer. He was my budget chairman, budget and finance, the department director. He now heads budget and finance for the University of Hawaii. He just announced that they got a huge deficit. When I came into office, just talking to David, say, well, come in and be Attorney General. Oh, by the way, we're $250 million in deficit for this year. And we've got to present a balanced budget in 30 days to the legislature in January. So I had to deal with that immediately, and legal issues concerning collective bargaining arose immediately.
Yeah, we had that. I mean, those were difficult times, and the governor was presented with, being underwater. And so the governor had Neil Dietz as a labor negotiator, went to the unions and went to talk to them and cut a deal with HGEA and UPW, but which was a 5% cut in pay. So the first thing he told me when I met with him was, "Oh, by the way, David, your pay is getting cut by 5%." So, "Oh, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that."
And the people who had supported me all my life institutionally, I went to and said, "By the way, thank you very much for your constant support all these years. I'm cutting your salaries.
Yeah.
And I'm asking you to pay more on your pensions."
But those were difficult times. And the thing about the state is you have to have a balanced budget. You have to do that. You can't run this deficit. And so we did that. The teachers union did not agree to that, and there was litigation over that. And so those were hard times, and the governor had to look around creatively for money. So I was down at the legislature helping to try and lobby with other members of his team, as to how to raise money. So those were difficult times.
That was my first opportunity to blame David for something. Because I said, well, look, we've got a contract. For those of you who may remember this, I see Tony Takatani smiling at this particular juncture about this. We made a deal with the teachers union. We came to a conclusion, and I was very happy about that. And it turns out then the teachers came back the next day after we made an agreement, said, well, we're not going to agree. Now, we went back to another committee that I never heard about, and they decided they didn't want to do it. And I'm going to clean up the language a little bit, but I said, well, why am I negotiating with you if somebody else gets to say yes or no? And so I then said at this point, I then said to David, can I impose this contract?
And we did. And they sued us, and we
notice he's
went forward with
saying
that.
we,
Yes.
but I'm the one
Yes.
that got this, which we did.
Right. And I defended it in court and at the labor court.
The irony being is that subsequently, the contract which had been rejected and for which I was then politically pilloried for the rest of my term was then voted on by the teachers union and voted 96% favorably, word for word, every dotted I and crossed T. This is part of the glory of electoral politics.
Yes, absolutely. So we got past that, and then we moved on to other issues. Lots of other issues. There was, homelessness, unhoused people was always a problem. Very difficult to solve.
And in the headlines these days, I mean, that's been steady right straight through what that's about. But the headlines just within the last couple of days was the idea of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands or other Hawaiian issues, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and could we get a settlement for 20 years, for the better part of a better part of 20 years, actually longer than that, there had been a lawsuit underway from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs to try and get a settlement, suing the state for not. And I came up with the idea that on the island of Oahu in the Kaka'ako area, on the Makai side of Ala Moana Boulevard, was land. And I thought that we could maybe make a deal with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and our Hawaiian constituency to give that land in lieu of the lawsuit. And I asked David if he could be the catalyst to make that happen.
Right, and so, I mean, there were these debts, Hawaiian history is very complicated, long, and lots of chapters to it. But it infuses what happens in the state of Hawaii in so many ways. And so there had been these disagreements with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs as to what was owed for ceded lands revenues, meaning the old crown lands, and what should be paid by the state to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And by the time I came into office, they wanted $400 million. We thought it was worth a lot less because of the disagreements, and we settled on a $200 million sum. But since we had no money to give either to the teachers or to anybody else, we could only give them land. And the governor, this had been tried. Ben Cayetano had tried to resolve this. Governor Lingle had tried to resolve this. They weren't able to do it because you had to get the legislature, you had to get the governor's office, you had to get the Native Hawaiians on board, and you had to figure out the problem. So we were able to, with the support of the governor, cut a deal. And that was one of the things that I prized a lot with working with Governor Abercrombie, was one, he could make a decision. Not all governors have been able to make a decision. There is no perfect time to make a decision. It's like warfare. I mean, really, you're in the fog of war, you're in the fog of government. You get the best information you can, then you make a decision, and then you proceed. And if you have to make a course correction, then you do so, which is what Governor Abercrombie did. But the thing I always prized was he was willing to cut the deal. And I have always been pragmatic to try and cut the deal, because, you know, that was what Lyndon Johnson said about Hubert Humphrey. Wonderful speeches, but he couldn't get a damn thing done. And it was Lyndon Johnson who passed the Civil Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson who was able to do these things, because unless you're going to cut the deal, which is what Joe Biden did with Senator Manchin and Chuck Schumer, unless you're going to cut the deal, and it may be half a loaf, it's still better than nothing. And so that's we were
My argument to the Hawaiians at that time, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, is right now you have 100% of nothing. And you've had 100% of nothing for more than 20 years. I'm offering you 100% of 100%.
So I was really pleased to be involved in that. The Native Hawaiian issues for the state are very complex. Nisei, Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Asian Americans have done well in the state of Hawaii. We are a majority or a co-majority with Caucasians, okay? But Native Hawaiians have not done as well. They have not been brought along. There's sometimes a sense of grievance, a sense of dispossession in their own homeland. And so it's very important that, you know, and the governor thought this was a huge value, that we try and move the ball forward, heal some of the divisions. We weren't going to solve all of them. They're very complex. But by starting to do that, and by healing some of the problems, we could push the ball forward.
And as David has indicated, one of the things I had to do when I was in Congress for the 10 terms I was in Congress was to try to explain to people the land tenure issue in Hawaii. And I remember speaking to some of the people in Iowa at one time, Mr. Representative King, you know, a rather notorious representative from Republican representative from Iowa. He says, "What's this business about Native Hawaiians? What's all this? That you want to sovereignty, this and that?" I said, Steve. I said, "Now, Steve King." I said, "Steve, I said, could you allow me to give you a very quick lecture, a brief lecture on land tenure in Hawaii, from a kingdom to a shotgun republic, to a territory of the United States, to the 50th state of the Union. He said, I don't think so. he said, I'll take your word for it.
That's
And-
because in Iowa, they just killed all the indigenous.
Why? And it's all corn or something there. And so land, whether it's land associated with crown lands going back to statehood and territory and the kingdom, or whether it's environmental issues associated with land, the ahupua'a, the idea of land from the mountains to the sea, and what constitutes a community, and what constitutes fair and equitable distribution of land post kingdom, are real issues. And one of the most potent ones, one of the ones that had not been solved again for more than 20 years, was on the North Shore,
Yeah.
out where Turtle Bay is, what's called Turtle Bay now.
Right, and so I got involved in that issue. I was, and it was one of those things
It was
of,
unsolvable, right?
well, it was at impasse.
Impasse, right.
And the governor had announced early on in the legislative session that he wanted to set aside 40 million in bonds to purchase a conservation easement and protect Turtle Bay, which is just lovely, and 665 acres of pristine, actually more than that, 750 acres of pristine, undeveloped land, stop it from hotels, condos, houses. There were
More than were there
Yeah.
already.
Oh, yeah, well, they had permits for 5,000 units, which was gonna just tear that community apart. And so halfway through the legislative session, unfortunately, there was impasse. Turtle Bay wanted this much money and we had this much money. And so,
If we could get it.
yeah, if we get it, and basically, I got a call from the governor, and so I came up and I met, and he says,
And I
well,
said, you solved it.
so I jumped in, and it was one of those things of, we need to cut a deal. And so you have like a month and a half, okay, for this big deal. You better work fast. So what we did was working with Blake Oshiro and the people at the Department of the Attorney General who had been working
My
on
deputy
this.
chief of staff,
And so
former legislator, very Akamai when it came to legislative activity and the personalities in the legislature.
right, a terrific person, absolutely terrific person. So we met with the head of the Turtle Bay company. It was a hedge fund. Their interest was just extract money out of this deal. But by going in and figuring out what the value, and the valuations were different. And so we cut to the chase quickly because I went and I sat down with him, we broke bread, and I explained, look, if you and I don't get to a deal very quickly, we can have maybe 2 or 3 back and forths, but this impasse thing has to stop, okay? Because otherwise, nothing's going to happen. You're going to get no money. I'm going to get no easement. And
I made it clear,
it won't
you
happen.
either do this or I'm gonna bring the hammer down and you're going nowhere. At a certain point, sometimes, and I said, I'm gonna back out of this now. And whatever deal you make, I'll go along with. But if you don't make a deal, believe me, you might as well pack up and go home. And you can tell your stockholders or whoever the hell has major investments and so on, it'll be a frosty morning in hell before you get anything.
And the
But
good,
I was nice.
right. He was his usual nice self. And the good
But I
thing
did,
was,
then I stayed up.
no, that's right. And with the backing of the governor and knowing that, we were able to cut a deal with Turtle Bay. And I will point out, we had terrific support from the Nature Conservancy,
Yep.
the Land for Public Trust, and the city and county, who also came in because we couldn't do it ourselves. We didn't have enough money to do it ourselves. So, but the city had chips, that they could cash in. The Nature Conservancy had chips and the Land for Public Trust had money. And they committed to raising monies to help buy this easement. So we cut a deal. We didn't get all of the land, but we got the biggest parts. We got Cavella Bay, we got the coastal areas. We got the only parts that I thought were important. And so we were able to do that. That was only half the story, because then we had to go back to the legislature. And at this point in time, the legislature had already moved on, because it had been at impasse for so long. They had said, yeah, we don't think the governor's team is going to get this done. So we're going to allocate all these monies. You can't have any bonding authority. So having gotten the deal, we now had to figure out how to get the money. And that's where we brought in genius boy, Calvert Young, who, is terrific with public finance. And we worked out a way to get money to fund this thing, to get 40 million from the state and to get and partner it up with the other organizations and do that. But I will tell you, it was nip and tuck. And this is where I got the experience of watching how the sausage is made in the legislature, which Uncle Tony knows quite well as to how that gets done. We're there at the very last, and Calvert and I are there on the very last day of the legislature. All the legislators are, they're done. And so some people think it's illegal to have alcohol in public buildings. And I would never say that it happened, but other people have reported that occurs. And so we're sitting there with all these legislators being offered glasses of something. And we're just being polite and drinking whatever it was with them. And then finally at 10 o'clock, so the legislature ends at 12, okay? That's at 11:59, that's it, done, okay? And we're sitting there going, oh, this might not get done. At 10 o'clock, Calvert and I get summoned to a meeting with now Governor David Louie and with House Chair Sylvia Luke. And I had been briefed that even with whatever mind-numbing blandishments I had, I knew the magic language that I needed to make this happen. And we were able to convince them to get the magic language into the bill, and we got it done. But it was 10 o'clock. Or thing was not going to happen. So that's, we were in the room where it happened, and I was really pleased once again to get the deal done.
Which allows us to segue into something that was even more controversial in my tenure. Some of you in Maui, especially if you're on the neighbor islands, didn't necessarily see, except possibly on television at the time, what happened around what was called same-sex marriage, but what I always referred to as marriage equity. I resented the idea that we were going to categorize what marriage was all about. I believe that if we're going to have equality, that it extends to everything. So I always talked about marriage equity, that everybody was entitled to an equal idea with respect to what would constitute the joining of people together. And this was at least, I remember saying at that time, saying to David, I said, we're going to win this argument. And when we win it, it's going to be very controversial, but 5 years after we win, no one will remember what the argument was about. And it kind of brought a smile to people's faces. And I say, let me tell you something. We will know when marriage equity, same-sex marriage has succeeded, when advertisements appear in the newspapers for divorce lawyers for same-sex marriage or marriage equity. And but at the time, it's a source of amusement now, but at the time, my wife and I were in what Vicky Cayetano had raised the money to build a home for the governor to live in, the governor and his or her family to live in, next to Washington Place, because Washington Place had been the classic home of Queen Liliuokalani, of course, And then all the governors had lived there from Bill Quinn and his family on. But the place was falling apart, and literally, and it had to be restored. And much credit to Ben Cayetano and Vicky for getting that underway. And Vicky raised the money privately to build a home next to the right next to Washington Place. So that's where the governors are now. Because Washington Place, again, thanks to Don Ige and others who have followed up on what my wife and Vicky Cayetano and Don Ige have accomplished with that. It's there. So it's right across the street from the Capitol. My wife has put up with an awful lot for the 50 years that I've been in politics and that we've been together on. And I don't say that as, 3 cheers for her or me or so on, but let me tell you, when you're committed to public life, it's we that's committed to public life. It's just not you. And what she had to endure at that time, screaming and the noise and the cursing and the denunciations, not just on the internet, I'm talking about outside. Everywhere we went outside, we could not sleep because it was 24 hours a day of loudspeakers denouncing us as spawns of the devil and God knows what else. God constantly invoking God to. I could deal with it. I mean, the only way you survive in politics, I told Davis, is the only way you survive in politics. If you don't have an inner life, you're doomed. And by an inner life, and see, you have to know who you are. If the only thing you are is a politician, you see this, I see it all the time on television now. I see people who don't have an inner life. Their life is their political life. It's their political persona. And when that's gone, they don't have anything. There's nothing inside. You have to know who you are. And let me tell you, if you're a spouse, including, you remember, David, I said, this is not just about you. This is going to be your spouse, your family too. But nothing like.
And I thank my spouse all the time.
Yes, right. Believe me. All I'm driving at with that is that this thing about marriage equity and so-called the same-sex marriage and the controversy and so on about it. Let me tell you, it was the most gut-wrenching, physical ordeal that I thought I knew what might happen, but it was nothing to compare to the reality of it. And David's and the team, I cannot thank Deidre enough. When I say protocol officer, more than that, I'm talking about people who were steadfast and understood what was happening. I had to, and David was there, call the legislature into special session because nobody wanted to deal with it. The entire leadership of the legislature, I don't care what they tell you now. I don't care what anybody says now. Believe me, I call them up to the conference room up there and I said, we're going to have a special session. Every single one of them said, no, don't do it. We'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it next year. I said, no, you're not going to deal with it next year. Next year, you'll tell me, oh, there's the budget, there's this, there's that, and you'll never get to it. We're going to call a special session. We're going to deal with this now. And I said to David, then take over. We're going to see this thing through, and I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to back off, and I'm going to see to it. I've spent my whole life with the idea of what the Aloha Spirit was all about. Why had given me everything. And if we're going to have equality and if we're going to treat each other as human beings, by God, this has been given to me, and a decision has to be made. And I said, this is my decision.
And, it was my privilege to be part of that. This was the signature issue, I think, of my term as Attorney General, to do something for equality, opportunity, and equity for people. I mean, it starts back with the Loving versus Virginia decision, overturned the US Supreme Court finally saying that racial intermarriage was okay. And now you have Clarence Thomas, who's married to a white woman, saying, well, gays shouldn't get married. We need to reverse those decisions. That's crazy. But this was an issue that meant a lot to me to be part of, just to be part of it, because people were not regarded as equal. Gay people, lesbian couples, homosexual couples, they were just not regarded as equal, and that's wrong. And so I was involved. There were so many facets. I'll just highlight a couple. One was when there was a lawsuit brought about this to overturn the existing Hawaii statute that said, marriage is between a man and a woman, and that was because of the backlash from the Hawaii Supreme Court decision back in the Bear versus Lewin case, which had occurred 20 years before, saying that is wrong to discriminate against. Yes, Judge Levinson. And so we were going to defend that lawsuit, and the governor and I talked about it, and we talked about, well, we're going to do what Jerry Brown is doing in California and what Eric Holder was doing nationally, and we're going to say, you know what? Forget the statute. The statute's wrong. We're not going to defend it. We're not going to defend it because that's what other people have done. And this is where the sausage of politics came into play, because I went up to the legislature and had some meetings with some, and I'm not going to name anybody, some legislative leaders. And they said, if you do that, that OHA deal you think you want to get through, it's going down. You have to defend the legislature. The legislature passed the law, you have to defend it. You cannot not defend it, which flew in the face of what the governor and I wanted to do. But I thought about it, and because the Attorney General's office has a special statute that allows us to have conflicts of interest, we can represent everybody in the state, and sometimes those everybody's have competing positions. So we figured out the way to use that statute, and I appointed one team of attorneys to take the governor's position that said, you know what, forget the statute. The statute's wrong. It's unconstitutional. That's wrong. And I had another team of attorneys to defend the legislative leaders and the legislature and say, no, we'll defend the statute. So I was able to thread the needle and move that
so
forward.
People ask me, how can you do that? You're defending it on the one hand and you're opposing it on the other. My answer was, watch me.
Yeah, exactly. And by doing that, I was able to move the OHA deal forward and still move forward with the marriage equity. And then the governor's calling the special session was great. A big issue like this, and I sat through countless meetings and hearings. We had a legislative team of attorneys general who called themselves, it was Ann Lopez, my special executive assistant, and Deidre Marie Iha and some others. They called themselves the Flaming Marys. And they helped craft the legislation. I mean, there were things like putting in a exclusion so that clergy would not be prosecuted for not doing a marriage. I mean, there's all this religious objections, and people have strong beliefs about that. So they crafted the legislation. It went forward. There were all these hearings. They were loud, raucous, 24/7 for weeks on end. It was very loud, but finally it passed. It passed, and we got it through. And I remember we had the signing ceremony. The governor convened it at the convention center, the Lilio Theater, and he brought in Nina Baer, and he signed the bill, and he gave her a
say who Nina Baer
pen.
is again.
Nina Baer was the original plaintiff who sued back in, I think, 1988 or 89.
And it was decided by 92.
Right, something like that. And so she was the original person who had brought the lawsuit that had gotten the successful and the very first opinion by a state Supreme Court saying that this is unconstitutional.
Then I brought
To
Judge
ban that.
Levinson.
And he brought Judge Levinson. And then he read a letter. I actually choke up about this. He read a letter from one of his friends who said, "We were invisible before, but now we are seen." It was very moving. And so I was very proud.
I said
to
at
be
the,
part
at
of
the, right, I said at the end, then nobody's gonna be invisible anymore. Nobody deserves to be indivisible. Everybody deserves to have their place in the sun.
So that was the signature, I think, the hugest quality issue that we were able to tackle and get a successful resolution to. And Hawaii, in many ways, has been socially conservative. When they first voted on the Con Am on this in the statute, Hawaii voted 70-30 to ban to prohibit same-sex marriage. But over the intervening 20 years, times change, mores change, thoughts change. People started to recognize that gay people were neighbors. They were people down the street. They were honest, hardworking people. They were just like the rest of us. There was no difference at all. There was no separation. And so there was no reason to have this separation. So I was pleased to be involved in that.
So in the end, what that came to then, and what David and I concluded is sometimes leadership sometimes is not just a reflection of what's going on around you, but leadership sometimes requires you to take the lead. And not everybody may be ready. You may not be. It doesn't mean you always know what the right path is. Sometimes you have to. I remember, the great catcher of the New York Yankees, Yogi Berra, has a special place in philosophers' hearts. He was the one who said, "When you come to that fork in the road, take it." And sometimes in politics, you come to the fork in the road and you got to take it. And so that means that sometimes that you're not where people are necessarily, but you know where you have to be or where you think you need to be, and you need to say so. Doesn't mean you're always going to be right. All kinds of, whether it's land issues, whether it's personal issues, whether it's issues of equity in terms of economics, and social issues and so on. So in the end, then, I think that it's time for us maybe to ask you folks what you'd like to speak about to either of us, but particularly to David, and he can explicate a little bit more. But the bottom line being that the difference in politics, I think, in Hawaii, and most certainly the difference in electoral politics, hopefully in the United States of America, and our as we are here in the 50th state, is that our diversity defines us rather than divides us. If we have that as a fundamental operating principle, which I think I can speak for both David and myself, that in the time that we have exercised authority on the basis of the trust and faith that have been placed in us by the voters in Hawaii, that we had as the fundamental operating principle that our diversity in Hawaii should define us and not divide us, and anything that we could do to enhance and support that foundation of diversity, as opposed to feeding into those things which would divide us. That's what we tried to do. And I can say to you in all sincerity that I was blessed to have the counsel and advice of an attorney general that any state in any of the union would be proud and happy to have in David Louie.
Well, thank you, Governor. That's very kind.
Now, can we, if you don't have to ask a question, if you have an observation you'd like us to comment on, we'd be pleased to do that as well. But if you have a question, I'm sure that I will ask David to answer it. So
There's a recent book by Tom.
time out before we do. If we're asking questions here, can they hear it on? We'll need to repeat it because the Zoom audience.
Great. There's a recent book by Tom Hoffman called Conclusion.
Yes, I have it.
It's a about people anticipating the effects of Japanese Americans of the US going to Japan.
Yes.
Now, if we go from then, of course, the executive order 9066, internment and all that happened.
Mhm.
If we fast forward to today, where we see with COVID, the attacks, the assault, the antagonism against Chinese Americans, and combined with the storm clouds that are coming from China, could the same thing happen again?
So let me repeat the question from
Yeah.
Linda Joesting, who I worked with in the legislature, and she was with the Department of the Attorney General and helped to advise me when I was on the Aloha Tower Board of Directors.
And the Joesting family has a long history of telling us what to do, right?
So Lyndon's question was, Tom Kaufman's recent book about inclusion and the what has happened with the internment and Executive Order 9066, taking that into account, taking into account the rise under the COVID pandemic of the anti-Asian hate and the attacks on Chinese Americans in Chinatowns in New York, San Francisco, and just anywhere else. And along with that, the tensions between China and the US on economic bases and Taiwan and all of those things. And the question Lyndon asked was, well, do we think that there's going to be consequences and bad or bad outcomes in the future because of this? So let me take a shot at that, and then the governor has some thoughts, I'm sure. I have been very concerned about the anti-Asian sentiments that have been brought up during the COVID pandemic, fueled a lot by President Trump and his kung flu remarks and his attempts to blame China for lots of things, and his fomenting of this. Again, he is one who likes to divide people for his own purposes as opposed to bringing them all together. And so I've watched with some degree of dismay about the attacks, and some of the it's very unfortunate that these attacks have occurred, and I always believe that these things can come up. In my view, the veneer of civilization can be stripped away very quickly, like in Lord of the Flies, when things break down, when people are desperate, when people fight over territory, values, or even water or something like that. And so I think it is entirely possible that there can be very bad consequences for Japanese Americans, for Chinese Americans, for Korean Americans, and for Asian Americans in general. And that it is the responsibility of responsible politicians and governments to step forward and say, this is wrong. And, it's a responsibility of China and the United States to try and lower the tensions that exist. I remember when I was a young man, and my mother used to show me these articles from Life magazine from World War II, where they distinguished between the good Chinese Americans, and here's a picture of one, and the bad Japanese Americans, and here's a picture of one, and they looked identical. There was no way to tell, and yet there was this fomentation of hatred, so that you could start thinking of people as animals, as objects, and you could go kill them. And that's the kind of thing that happens. I think hopefully we have responsible leaders that will put us, at least damp that down or try and prevent that. But I do worry about that.
I think it's going to be even worse than that. I think it's going to be more extensive. It's happening right now. All you have to see is what Governor DeSantis and the Texas governor Abbott is doing right now. Believe me, if former President Trump is returned to office, what you're going to see is what he already started, taking children away from their parents and disappearing them. There are children right now, as we're talking here today, that have been taken away from their parents at the border, down from Mexico and the United States. Not necessarily, by the way, Mexican kids. They could be from God knows where coming, who have been taken away from their parents, put in cages. And there will be people that can do it. I just got sent away for a copy. And you know, the one good thing about streaming is you can get films. I urge you to if you can get a copy of Judgment at Nuremberg. Judgment at Nuremberg. It's probably almost 70 years now, with Maximilian Schell and Spencer Tracy and Burt Lancaster playing the judge. This wasn't about the Goebbels and the Gorings and the big shots in the Nazi regime. This was about the trials after World War II, the war crimes trials of the judges and the doctors down below. The judges. Look what this judge just did with the ex-president of the United States stole classified documents. I served on the Armed Services Committee for 20 years. He stole those documents. He should be in prison right now. And the judge is saying, well, we don't necessarily, maybe these aren't really the documents and so on. If anybody doesn't think that Mr. Trump has returned to the presidency, that he will reinstitute detention camps and that he will find people to be the guards and all the rest of it, then you're in dreamland. I will tell you, if he comes back, there will be detention camps again, and they won't even be called. I don't know what they'll be called, but you will find refugees and if you don't think that it's a history of this in the United States, I know on PBS this weekend, Ken Burns is showing how that at the time of the Holocaust that when Jewish refugees were attempting to come in the United States, they were turned away. They were turned away because of anti-Semitism, whether it's anti-immigrant, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's anti-Asian, whatever it is. When you can dehumanize the other person, when you can make them the other, when you can subtract their humanity from them, you can do anything. And I believe that's what's at stake right now. At the conclusion of Judgment at Nuremberg, Spencer Tracy, of course, voted to convict the judges. And the judge asked Spencer Tracy to come, and they were sentenced to life. And he asked Spencer Tracy, as the American judge, to come, and he gave him his law books. And he said to Spencer Tracy, you know, I never thought it would come to this. I never thought it would come to this. And Tracy, in Abby Mann's play, says to him, it came to that the first time you put somebody you knew was innocent into prison. The first time you knew someone was innocent and found them guilty. The first time you take a child away from a parent who's trying to get away from violence and terror and horror and separate that child away and turn it into the other, you are dehumanizing people. I'm sorry to go on at such a length, but I think this is a human disaster that is on the forefront if the forces represented by Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott and former President Trump are able to succeed.
Governor, our chief protocol officer has an announcement.
So we are gently running out of time, and just to keep on track, especially for the Zoom audience, we have two questions from Zoom that I'm going to ask. The one is from Hester. She said she finds it ironic and awfully sad that the state of Hawaii has to buy back or pay money for an easement to secure the rights to property that rightfully belong to the Hawaiian people. Mm-hmm. How did you manage to keep yourselves focused in light of such history in dealing with Turtle Bay?
So Turtle Bay was private land. It was not part of the Crown lands. And so a conservation easement is an agreement that we didn't buy the land back, but we bought an easement that said you can never, ever develop this land. And so that's what they agreed to. Turtle Bay still holds the title to that land. The state doesn't own it, but there is on the title of the land, on the deed, there was a prohibition on development on these 665 acres that surround Cabela Bay. And as to your question, Hester, as to how we stayed focused, some days we're more focused than others. And I think the idea is you just constantly have to remind yourself what's the most important thing that we can do for the people of Hawaii, and then what's on my plate today, and can we get to the most important things? And you try and keep yourself focused and keep the people who work for you focused. One of the great things about being Attorney General is I had 185 deputy attorneys, and they could do wonders even if I wasn't, right there beside them. They would go off and do things, and so that was terrific. And I want to thank all of those people. They were wonderful, and they saved my bacon many times, and did a lot of good works. And I got to take credit for it, but they really were the ones who were in the trenches.
The way I stayed focused on it was, as I told David and the others, I said, they'll take the money rather than the grief. And I don't apologize for that. The abstract question about the land and the whole idea of it being for a common purpose, the commons, right? For the common good, I'm all for that. But my job then at that time is, how can I maximize the common good to come out of the circumstances that I have immediately in front of me? And what I had immediately in front of me, short of going to the hedge fund people and playing the Godfather, right? Make them an offer they can't refuse. I didn't have a gun I could put and say, sign it or else. I couldn't do that. The only gun I had was to be able to say to them, I will give you endless grief, but will you take the money instead? They took the money. That's what those people wanted in the first place. They didn't give a damn about the land. This wasn't important to them. What was important is, could they go to the other investors and say, we got money out of this? So my focus was tell them to take the money and run.
So before we close for the Zoom, we have one more hard-hitting question, and then I'd like to both give some closing remarks. But of course, you could stay later and chat with everybody here in the center. Big question from Neil Deep. Would General Louie care to comment why he developed gray hair only after the US?
Neil Dietz was a great guy,
Yeah.
A former union labor negotiator. He came over, seafarers. He came and he was terrific in working out these labor problems and addressing them. He didn't solve all of them, but he solved a lot of them. And he was a great guy. The one thing about labor negotiations is there's so much emotion and so much conflict involved. And Neil was the calmest person in the room. He was super calm. Great guy, did a great job. I am blessed with good genes. Okay. And my father did not turn gray until he became 70. And so that's it. Now, the flip side of that is when I was an attorney in my 20s, I looked like I was 12. And so it was a little difficult. But thank you, Neil.
Deidre, my closing remark is we're here at this incredible facility. I want to give my thanks, not just to you, but to the veterans who made this possible. Many of them now no longer with us anymore. This is a legacy. And the reason that it's so important to have facilities like this and programs that take place like this is that we will not forget what we had to do and what needed to be done in order to achieve this more perfect union where there's diversity and all the rest of it. And the centerpiece, and I'm going to ask you, Deidre, to make an introduction here right behind you. If you come to this facility, what you will see is the most magnificent mural in the state of Hawaii with respect to a particular faction and element of Hawaiian history. And the artist is sitting literally right in front of me right now, who, by the way, I think the only time I other than in dealing with same-sex marriage, with marriage equity, I had tears, was when I chose who was going to do the portrait of the seventh governor. And here he is, right here.
uh, that this mirror, that mural, it has meant so much to me, and it's given more to me than I have put into it. It is it's hard to talk about because there's so much that's there, and there's so much that I learned from it, and so much people that I've met from it. It has been an honor, and I'm proud to just be a part of the center. Thank you so much.
So Deidre, for my closing remarks, I want to say, first, Governor, thank you so much for putting your faith and trust in me, allowing me to serve as Attorney General. It was the best job I ever had. It was an opportunity of a lifetime. It was great. And I want to thank Deidre and NVMC for putting on this event. I mean, it's wonderful to see the NVMC. And I think NVMC is sort of a microcosm of really a lot of values that Maui has, but also Hawaii has, which is that community matters and that people have to come together. And we're not individuals. I don't believe in the great man theory that a single individual can do it. It's the collective we that can accomplish these goals. And the fact that I was able to participate in a number of initiatives and projects with the governor and with the whole state and get some things accomplished and move some of these things forward was because of lots and lots of support. And so people like Tony Takitani, Jill Wildman, and I know others in this audience who have stepped forward in leadership roles that are some small, some large, but they all matter. They all matter, and they all move things forward. And so thank you.
Thank you. We thank you both so much for being here today. We thank our audience, both in person and on Zoom, for being with us today. And we're going to close out the Zoom, but we welcome everybody here to talk story, get your book signed, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon with us. Thank you so much, Attorney General David Louie. Thank you so much, Governor Neil Abercrombie. Thank you.
Thank you, Deidre. Sir.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Very